What if I told you that finding all the gold in the world was the worst thing that ever happened to Spain? In 1550, the empire hit the ultimate jackpot, only to realize they had accidentally poisoned themselves. They were so rich, they used gold coins to plug holes in their tables, yet they declared bankruptcy 9 times. They owned the world's mines, but they couldn't afford a loaf of bread. This is the story of the resource curse. How easy money destroyed a superpower and turned a nation of warriors into a museum of empty palaces. Welcome to Luxury Historian, where luxury, status symbols, and power set the rules, but every shine hides a cost. Imagine a world where money is so common it loses its magic. Seville, 1550. The Spanish Empire has just unlocked the greatest cheat code in history. The Flota de Indias, the Silver Fleet, arrives at the harbor. Its holds are bursting with gold from the Incas and silver from Potosi. The volume of precious metal is so high that legends say people used gold coins to plug the gaps in their wooden tables. This was the peak of the resource curse. Spain believed they had found infinite wealth, but they had actually stepped into a resource trap. They mistook treasure for an economy, not realizing that wealth you don't build, you can't keep. Look past the glitter of the port. 100 miles away in a dusty, sun-baked village in Castile, time is stopped. A heavy royal carriage passes through the silent street. Its wheels are caked in mud, but the cargo inside is hundreds of Aztec gold bars. The villagers have no bread, no clean water, and no future, but they are the subjects of the richest king on earth. The harbor was a hallucination of power. Spain was becoming a giant, with gold in its pockets and rot in its bones. The first sign of the collapse wasn't a lost war, it was the rising cost of a simple loaf of bread. In the 16th century, Spain learned a lesson that modern central banks still study. If everyone has gold, gold is worth nothing. As the Silver Fleet dumped its cargo in Seville, the laws of supply and demand turned against the empire. This was the price revolution. Within decades, the cost of living jumped by 400%. This was hyperinflation before the word even existed. The flood of American bullion didn't create new goods. It only made the existing ones impossibly expensive. The empire's purchasing power was evaporating. A Spanish ducat that once bought a cow now barely bought a chicken. The gold wasn't wealth anymore. It was just a shiny medium for a national disaster. Step into the marketplace of Madrid. A nobleman in a slashed silk doublet, his family name older than the city, stands before a simple baker. He tosses a heavy gold ducat onto the counter for a loaf of bread. The baker doesn't even pick it up. He looks the aristocrat in the eye and demands 2. Status can buy a title, but it can't bargain with a hungry stomach. Spain was drowning in metal, but starving for reality. And as prices rose, the empire made a fatal decision. Instead of fixing their own economy, they decided it was easier to just import everything from their rivals. The flood of American gold was a kiss of death for Spanish industry. It created a paradox that economists today call the Dutch disease. When easy money flows in, the incentive to actually work and produce disappears. Because of inflation, it became cheaper to buy a pair of shoes from a Dutch craftsman or silk from an English weaver than to make them in Madrid. Spanish gold was effectively subsidizing the industrial growth of its own enemies. Spain stopped being a factory and became a shopping mall. The empire was rich enough to buy the world, but too wealthy to feed itself. This was the death of the middle class, the artisans, the shoemakers, and the weavers who are the spine of any stable state. Look inside a workshop in Toledo. The workbench is covered in a thick layer of gray dust. A single spider spins a web across a set of rusted cobbler's tools. Outside, through the dirty window, you can see the harbor where a Dutch galleon is unloading thousands of pairs of boots for the Spanish army. The Spanish shoemaker didn't lose to a better rival. He was killed by his own king's treasure. Spain had traded its skills for silver, and while the people grew idle, the king retreated into a world of stone and silence, building a monument to a power that was already hollowing out from within. If Versailles was a theater for dance, the Escorial was a cathedral for death. Built by Philip II, this massive granite grid was the headquarters of a global superpower that traded prosperity for piety. This was the ultimate opportunity cost. While England and Holland were investing in ships and trade schools, Philip II was pouring the gold of the Americas into marble tombs and golden altars. To him, luxury wasn't for pleasure. It was a weapon of religious dominance. The luxury here was dark. It wasn't about mirrors and silk. It was about the crushing weight of stone and the silence of the Inquisition. Every ounce of silver used to plate a saint statue was silver that didn't go into fixing a road or building a bridge. Look at the king himself. Philip II often wore nothing but black. But this wasn't humility. It was the ultimate flex. His black velvet suit, dyed with the rarest insects from the New World, cost more than the annual budget of a small city. He sat in the shadows of the Escorial, a black spider presiding over a web of gold that was slowly suffocating his people. The king was obsessed with the purity of his faith and the purity of his blood. But as the empire's economy withered under the weight of the Escorial's granite, the Hapsburg family itself began to twist and break. The Spanish Empire was dying, and the rot started at the face of its kings. To keep the gold and the power within the family, the Hapsburgs committed the ultimate biological error. They married their own blood. This was the physical manifestation of institutional decay. As the dynasty's bloodline thinned, so did the state's ability to function. A family that owned half the world was becoming a genetic disaster, incapable of producing a leader who could even chew his own food. The gold couldn't fix the genes. The more they surrounded themselves with silver and velvet, the more obvious their weakness became. Opulence was the mask, but the face beneath it was collapsing. Look at the final act. Charles II. He is the bewitched king. He sits on a throne made of solid, cold silver, surrounded by the greatest treasures of the Americas. But he cannot speak clearly because his jaw is too large. He cannot swallow because his tongue is too big. He is the richest man on earth, but he is a biological beggar. The silver throne is a monument to a race that spent everything on status and forgot how to survive. While the king sat in silent agony, his people were performing a different kind of tragedy. In the streets of Madrid, everyone was trying to look like a millionaire, even as they starved. In the Spanish Empire, work was not a virtue. It was a social death sentence. This was the era of the hidalgo, the petty nobleman who believed that manual labor was a stain on his soul. This culture led to total social stagnation. When an entire nation decides that being a gentleman means doing nothing, the economy stops breathing. Spain was a land of velvet beggars, men who wore silk capes but hadn't eaten meat in a week. Status was the only currency that mattered. Even the poorest Spaniard would go into debt to buy a sword and a lace collar just to prove he wasn't a vile laborer. They traded their future for the appearance of a glorious past. Look at the mourning ritual of a dying class. A nobleman sits in a dark, cold room. He takes a piece of dry bread and carefully rubs his old leather boots until they shine like mirrors. He adjusts his cape to hide the holes in his shirt. He steps out into the sunlight with his head held high, looking for someone to lend him money for dinner. He is a master of the illusion of wealth, unaware that the ground beneath his polished boots is already hollow. Pride had become Spain's greatest export and its most expensive luxury. But while the hidalgos were busy polishing their boots, the king was busy signing the world's most elegant death warrants for his own treasury. Spain was a giant with pockets full of holes. Between 1557 and 1666, the richest empire on earth declared sovereign. Default 9 separate times. It was a mathematical impossibility. The owner of all the world's silver was broke. The problem was a classic debt spiral. The silver from the Americas didn't go to Spain. It went directly to the bankers of Genoa and the Fugger family to pay for wars that had already been lost. The empire was living on a high-interest credit card it could never pay back. Every galleon that arrived was already owned by foreign investors before it even docked. Spain was just a middleman for its own treasure. Look at the king's desk. He is signing a decree that will ruin thousands of merchants and freeze the economy. He uses a quill pen carved from solid gold and decorated with emeralds from Colombia. The ink is still wet on the word bankruptcy, but the tool used to write it costs enough to feed a city. It was the ultimate display of a regime that refused to trade its status for solvency. The king was the richest bankrupt in history. And when the silver finally stopped flowing, Spain woke up to a reality where the glitter was gone, but the emptiness remained. The silver fever was over, and Spain woke up to a headache that lasted a century. By 1700, the empire realized it had committed a slow, golden suicide. This was the total deindustrialization of a superpower. Because they had imported everything for 100 years, they had forgotten how to build anything. Spain had thousands of grand cathedrals, but no factories. Millions of silk-clad nobles, but no engineers. The empire was a hollow shell, a luxury facade with nothing inside. They had traded their skills for shiny metal, and when the metal was gone, they were left with a desert. Look at the Plaza de San Francisco in Seville. Once the beating heart of world trade, it is now eerily quiet. The wind blows dust across the empty stones where gold bars once piled as high as walls. The great galleons are gone, replaced by the ghosts of a wealth that didn't stay. Spain had become the world's first open-air museum, a place that looked like a power but functioned like a memory. The golden century ended in a gray morning. But the lesson of the Spanish Empire didn't die in the 17th century. It moved into the bank accounts of the modern world, waiting for its next victim. The Spanish Empire didn't just lose its gold, it lost its soul to the illusion of easy wealth. But this isn't just a story about the 17th century, it is the blueprint for the modern rentier state. Whether it's 16th century silver or 21st century oil, the trap remains the same. When a nation lives off a single resource instead of its own innovation, it enters a golden cage. You can buy the finest cars and the tallest towers, but you are only as strong as the price of your commodity. We see the Spanish hangover today in lottery winners who go bankrupt and nations that stop producing because it's easier to import. Luxury without a foundation is not wealth, it is a countdown to a crash. We are still building palaces on sand, hoping the tide never comes in. The light of the empire is fading. Look at the single candle on a silver holder. As it dies, the neon lights of our modern cities glow brighter than ever. But remember, Seville, the more you rely on the glitter you didn't create, the darker the room becomes when the gold runs out. Status is a beautiful mask, but reality always unmasks the bill. If you want to understand why empires fall when they look their brightest, subscribe to Luxury Historian. We read the fine print of history, so you don't have to pay the price of the past. Spain's empire was hollowed out by too much gold, but centuries later, the Romanovs tried to hide a crumbling state under a mountain of borrowed diamonds. To see how the last TSRs danced through their own gilded winter until the final bill arrived, watch our next video.